Hey, Shawna, help because I look on social media and I see all these quote experts that have all the answers for going through all the menopause things. So, how do we know as women where to get our advice and what practices to follow to solve all these menopause challenges?
I'm with you, Alli. And every day there seems to be more and more on the socials. And it can get so challenging and confusing in terms of who's an expert and what to do and what practices are worthy and what are scams. And our guest today, Susanne Williams, is an occupational therapist with 30 years of healthcare and educational practice under her belt. And she gives us some great advice in terms of whom to follow, what advice to take, what sorts of things that we can do to truly help ourselves through these challenging times.
And before we dive in, let's give a shout out to our Girls Talk Healthy Aging listener, Miss Mary Jane Leader. Thanks for listening. Now let's dive in. Welcome to the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast, where we dive deep into pressing health and fitness issues facing aging women. I'm Alli Kerr.
And I'm Shawna Kaminski. And together we'll bring candid conversations, expert advice, and personal stories that will inspire and empower you on your own wellness journey.
And we're so happy to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
I know that you're going to bring a really interesting spin on how occupational therapy spills into healthy aging and even menopause. But before we get into that, could you tell us kind of what inspired you to get into occupational therapy as a practice and how Touchstone, your business, came to be?
Well, my experience with OT goes way back to when I was a kid, and I have an uncle who has Down syndrome. And he was living in an institution, which at the time was what happened. He's getting close to 80 years old now, which is incredible. So this was when that was the thing to do. And he would bring us gifts that he had made in OT at Christmas time for our family. And I was always like, what is OT? This seems really cool. And then the more he always had such a presence in my life and such an impact in my life and how I thought about things and how I thought about people that I really developed a passion for exploring OT more. So I pursued OT as a career and I've never looked back. I really love it. I love that there's so many different areas of practice in OT. I think that's what's kept me engaged and interested in it. I'm passionate about it for so long. So I started Touchstone OT in 2015, and I was primarily working with kids at that time. I kind of come to that. I started off my career working in a hospital system to learn, of course, and be mentored. Then I went on to working for home care and other adult community agencies for kids. When my own 3 kids were young, I really wanted to be more on their schedule. So I thought, okay, I'm going to make the big shift to pediatrics full time, even though it was really like starting a whole new job.
Can you tell us, Susanne, what OT, when we say OT, we're talking about occupational therapy. Can you just tell our listeners a little bit more about what that is and what that entails, just so we kind of have a baseline?
Yeah, absolutely. So in occupational therapy, we think about occupations a little bit differently than you might. And I think that's why it's a little bit not well understood at times. We really think about occupations as the things that people engage in throughout their day, or the activities that occupy their time that are meaningful to them. And so we always, so for children, for example, their main occupations are to learn and to grow and to develop their skills and hit their milestones. And, we really, in occupational therapy, we really look at the whole picture. And so we always come to every client with a very comprehensive lens, so we can support physical health and mental health and cognitive health. We also look at a person's environment, how that's impacting them. We look at their sensory systems, like are there things in their environment that are impacting, and how can we adapt and support that? We're really skilled in taking an activity and looking at the person's skills and their goals. It's always about the person's goals. That's why we're a very client-centered profession. We really look at what the person wants to work on, and we set our treatment plans around that. I may see a client and think, okay, well, here are a few things that I think I could support, but I want to hear from you how I can help you. We also, of course, look at social supports and relationships, family systems, a lot of different areas, actually, the more I think about it. And when I made the leap into women's health, I really feel like I have had to do that, educating about OT over and over again, which isn't surprising to me, because, of course, if you are in a hospital or most of the other programs in working with kids, most people know what OTs can offer in terms of fine motor skills and sensory processing and all of these different areas, equipment needs. But in women's health, I didn't really realize it at the time, but it is kind of new territory for OT, which is exciting.
Yes, and this is what we kind of wanted to dive into, because for both Alli and I, it was kind of a new area that I never really considered. So could you tell us a little bit about how occupational therapy and like menopause, where's the connection, and how do you work with women to support them during this challenging time?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking, because, I really, you probably won't be surprised to know that I expanded into women's health because of my own experience through menopause. And I really, which I think is so common in life. And, I really, about 10 years ago, maybe, when I was in the thick of it, there just wasn't a lot of information out there. We weren't talking about it the way we are now. And of course, now there's so much information, maybe almost too much information and misinformation, which is another story. But at that time, I really felt kind of isolated. And then what I started to realize was how fortunate I was as a healthcare worker, that I could access some good information for myself, along with the help of my doctor. But I recognized that not a lot of people are able to do that. And it really wasn't easy. And so my friends weren't really talking about it too much. But then as things evolved and we got talking more and more, I started thinking, well, these conversations are powerful. Like, I was blown away, and I mean, not surprised. And of course, as I dove into the research myself, I was sharing things, little tidbits with friends. And it really got me thinking, about how those conversations with women and getting women together and talking about their health, how those stories are so important. I also, I lived this myself. When what really pushed me to this was when a few years ago, my dad was ill and his health was really declining, and I was going back and forth to Ontario a lot, ended up with a frozen shoulder. And I know you just had a doctor on talking about frozen shoulder, so you know all about it. And I had only ever experienced frozen shoulder from clients that I'd worked with in stroke rehab back in the day. I'm like, what is this? And of course, it kind of made sense to me that this sort of perfect storm of menopause with my, this physical, I'm in a stressful time of my life. I have a lot of emotions going on. My mental health is struggling. Here is a physical manifestation of it, because of course I carry all my stress in my shoulders, like a lot of women. And I just got thinking that, wow, here is where the mind-body connection plays a part and what a powerful role OT could have here, because we look at that whole picture. And so I ended up having a lunch at my house with about 50 or 55 women, and I did like a little informal survey. Well, what are some things, like, do you think this is a good idea? Do you think this is a viable practice? And I asked them some questions about, like, what's the best advice you've had, and what's the worst, and what would be helpful for you? And so it really developed from there, and the fact that I can really help women look at their whole picture. It's not just one thing, as we know, that we can point to, especially during menopause when we're dealing with so much. Women, I find, are just so overwhelmed at this time of life, and understandably so. I mean, we have our body is changing, our health is changing. We're having trouble sleeping. We might be care partnering with our parents, or with our kids or adult kids. So many things going on. We're trying to work part-time or full-time. So I really felt like it would be helpful to really look at a woman's day, at her life, at her everyday activities, and think about, well, what are your habits and routines? How are you managing at home and at work? How is menopause specifically impacting the things that you want to be doing right now to have good quality of life? So I hope that answers that question. I kind of went on.
No, of course. And you kind of got into, that was kind of my next question, is how you meet the needs of your clients. And I really like the holistic aspect of it. Now, as an occupational therapist, you would not be prescribing, but maybe that, that's not in your lane, but maybe that would be a conversation that you would have to say, these are questions that you would go to your doctor about, but these are habits that we could be looking at. Like, what are the big movers that will improve your quality of life, and how can we achieve that? Is that kind of how it works?
Exactly. It's not really about prescription of medications or anything. It's more like prescripting a lifestyle, I guess. Like, I was really excited to learn that, like, the Canadian Menopause Society and the International Menopause Society are both really highlighting lifestyle medicine this year, or in 2025. And, to me, that just really empowers women, because there's so much that we have control of, that we can do in our day-to-day, that's going to impact our health in a really positive way. So, the assessment that I developed really goes through in detail, well, how is menopause impacting your physical health? Then we talk about their mental health. What brings you joy? What does self-care mean to you? Are you carving out time in your day that you can practice some self-care? And I mean, self-care, again, that's a word that's maybe a little overused right now, and also a little bit commodified, which I don't like, because I feel like, especially on Instagram, of course, but self-care to me is whatever it means to that person. It would be different if we all answered that question. We'd have a different answer. And it's really finding the time in your day to take those moments for yourself when you need them. We talk about emotional health. How is menopause impacting that? Maybe there are some referrals that I can help you with. Do you need to see a psychologist? And then I also provide a lot of resources around, like, especially from the menopause societies, because I know those are good quality, evidence-based resources. And when I have done, because I offer one-on-one sessions, and I've been doing some group sessions, I always have a resource, like a handout to provide. And women will come back to me and say that they were able to take those resources and have really good conversations with their doctor. You know, unfortunately, and I don't think it's the physician's fault. It's just like, as we have learned, right? There hasn't been much education about menopause in medical schools, and so it's really, honestly, doctors don't always know how to help. And so the women say to me, you know, because you shared those resources, I was able to take them and advocate for myself. And that's really my goal, is really helping women just advocate, because it's important. We all need to do it. We know that.
We're going to interrupt this interview for just a second because we've got something we want to make sure that you know.
If you're struggling with your health, with your fitness, if you don't know where to start, or you know what to do and you're not doing it, we're here for you.
And all you need to do to get our help is to reach out to Shawna and I at our email, sapodcast23@gmail.com. And we're happy to help, and we will be in touch. Now back to the show.
And with talking about the medical school and with occupational therapy, what kind of training is there that is relative to menopausal women, or is there? And how, maybe there's another occupational therapist listening that's never thought about this area. How would someone go that route to do more what you're doing? Is there a track for that, or how does that work?
You know, it's really interesting. I know one of the university programs in Canada does have a women's health specialty in OT now, at U of T. But, you know, I think what it really comes down to is not necessarily that I didn't learn a lot about menopause in OT school. No, definitely not. But what we learned a lot about, of course, was healthy aging and health promotion and wellness, even, you know, and how to live a healthy life with good quality of life, and respecting that and understanding that as we go through life, we go through lots of different transitions, and we have to learn how to adapt to those as we go along. And of course, OTs work with so many different kinds of clients, you know, some that have basically through the expected phases of life and through the unexpected, you know, through disease or disability, or, you know, so many different things. We're really well trained in those transitions, and taking an activity that somebody really values and adapting it for them, whether that's with equipment or different body mechanics, but making sure that, you know, giving them a card holder for if they, you know, if playing cards is really important to them. Simple things, not always simple, but practical tools that they can use so that they can still enjoy the things that they really want to enjoy. That's kind of what it's all about.
And I really like that your approach is very habits-based and research-based and not product-based. Can you share a little bit about how you feel about, you know, the wild, wild west of menopause, and what, you know, Mrs. Jones and Mrs. Smith needs to be watching out for, because they're at their most vulnerable?
They really are. And oh my goodness, every time I see someone in my neighborhood walking with a weighted vest, you know, I just, but you know, I'm always like, if it works for you, try it, but also be just very wary of getting your information from Instagram or for someone that's trying to sell you something, you know. And I understand why women do that, because we are desperate at times. Well, all people get in that mode at times where we're just looking for something that's going to help us. And I think that's human nature, to always be looking for the next best thing. But we know that.
Can you speak to that, Susanne, as far as like, I know that many of our viewers are listening to this, so they couldn't see kind of the head roll or the the hand to the forehead that Shawna had when you mentioned walking and seeing someone in your neighborhood with a walking vest on, a woman who's probably in the menopausal years or older. And not that that's a bad thing to wear a weighted vest, but tell me why why we had that reaction to the weighted vest walking in the neighborhood. Why? What's going on there?
Well, it's really interesting because I think we just know when we have some background that it isn't really necessary.
It's not a big lever that we can pull that's going to work magic.
Exactly. I have to say there are some things that, like from my OT world, that I am really glad have come into the mainstream. Like, to be honest, I have used weighted vests before in schools with kiddos who really have trouble like regulating their bodies, and that little bit of weight, or like a little animal around their shoulders that has a bit of weight, that can be really calming for a kiddo. And when weighted blankets came onto the market, and that was sort of an explosion, or fidget spinners, that we OTs love. Yeah, there you go. Yay. Yeah, I love it. Like,
Shawna has a fidget spinner, right? They're handy. She's ready.
That's the OG fitness spinner. But I have a session tonight. I've got my bucket ready to take with me of fidgets because I know it helps some people focus better, right? But the more that these things come into the mainstream, the better it is for people that really need to use them, right? Like, it just destigmatizes the need for these little tools. But I guess the weighted vest for adults thing is like, I saw a woman in her late 60s who had quite severe osteoporosis. And she asked me, like, should I buy a weighted vest? And I said, well, I would be really concerned for you and your back. Like, you could hurt yourself. And so I think that they're all tools, and maybe they're going to be helpful for some people, but you just have to really think about what your body needs, right?
And it's tough because we are all looking for answers, and it's so quick and easy and fast to get them when you just scroll. You can just Google anything and get an answer, but it's not a personalized answer so if you're already in bad posture, like I'm guessing the lady that had osteoporosis, and then she goes and puts that weighted vest on top of that poor posture, it's just going to reinforce that poor posture. But the internet's not going to yet. I don't know, maybe one day the internet will be able to look at you, assess you, scan you, and say, here's what you need. But we're just not there completely yet, although, some of the technology may seem to be that good, but I just don't think we have that kind of eyeballs yet that can really, and eyes and ears. Technology can't look at you and listen to you and hear about you and your particular situation and then prescribe.
Well, I also think that it's easy to, hit buy on the weighted vest, which is like the idea of majoring in the minors. That is not going to push the lever that's going to help you the most. Whereas if you went to bed earlier, or if you just jumped on the spot while you were brushing your teeth, or like, you don't necessarily have to spend money. You might just have to change some habits. So in your experience, what are the big levers of habit change that you would like to, if you could, we've got a captive audience here listening to an expert on what are the most important health habits that, someone could review today to see some healthy change.
Well, of course, sleep is a huge one. And probably the biggest one for women. Like, every women's health course or conference that I have attended, the doctors and the experts have highlighted the need that if you're working with women, we need to be talking to them about their sleep and prioritizing that. I was at the Canadian Menopause Society conference in September, and Dr. Denise Black did an amazing presentation talking about this and saying that it's like suggesting a reframe of perimenopause as a sleep disorder, as much as it is a hormonal disorder. And that was really powerful. Like, it's remarkable the number of friends that I have that are just, they've gotten so used to not sleeping well. It's just, it's unbelievable to me. And I have a session tonight actually specifically talking about sleep, because every one of my sessions we end up talking about it, and I'm like, I need to dedicate a full session. And obviously, like other things, I always think about like the big pillars for brain health. So obviously exercise and sleep and nutrition. Stress management is a huge one for me in working with women. I'm really concerned about everyone's mental health right now. We've touched a little bit on about like the world that we're living in right now. And I really worry about loneliness and how that's impacting women. Menopause can be really an isolating time if you don't have a support system. And then, of course, like occupying your brain, stimulating your brain, finding creative pursuits. Stacking habits is really important, you know. So, like you were saying, Shawna, if you're maybe instead of spending money on the vest while you're making coffee in the morning, do a couple of little jumps or do some stretching, you know, build them into your day. If you're having trouble sleeping, maybe add a couple of notes to your journal about how did you sleep, like track it a little bit and see if you can find some patterns while you're making your coffee. Things like
patterns are a great thing to track. And this is, of course, important for menopausal women, but women of all ages, we're always looking for the quick things. My niece just reached out and asked me about a pre-workout because she's going to be working out in the mornings. Now, she's college age, so she's asking me about a pre-workout. And I said, one of the most underused pre-workouts is getting a good night's sleep, especially if you're doing a morning workout. So, but, you know, that doesn't, you can't put a buy now button. Well, I guess you can if it's a sleep aid, but there's, you know, those things that you're talking about, Susanne, it's harder because we can't push a button and just by those intentional journaling and checking our sleep. So I think, can you speak to the challenges of that and how we can maybe reframe that so it's something that does seem doable? Because it may just seem overwhelming that we have to do all these things versus buy all these things.
Yeah, it's so true. And, you know, this is, I think, where OT can play a really unique role. And I was mentioning this to Shawna before, is that like almost every one of my sessions, I have like a planner of some kind, right? And we really, you know, I find that so many other professionals are like, here's XYZ of your list of things that you need to do, or here's 10 exercises and to do, and then come back and see me. And I mean, I was guilty of this as a new hospital therapist, new grad years ago. And then I went and worked in the community in home care. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe the programs that I would send home with people. And really where I think I can help is that breakdown of a person's day, because we all know the habits for a healthy lifestyle. We all know them. Like, we know them like the back of our hand. But I know you had Dr. Stuart Phillips on. I watched that podcast and I love him and his work. And he said, I think he said something like 20% of women do strength training. So, I mean, why is that? Why is it that only 20% of women are engaging in that when we hear in the media, on Instagram, how important it is? Like, what is it? What are the barriers that are preventing women from doing that? And so I really...
Well, maybe we think we need a pre-workout to go do. We don't, you know, it gets so complicated. We need this to be able to go and do strength training, or we need this device or that device, and it's maybe just overwhelming and people don't know where to start. That's what I find with a lot of ladies that come to me, is they just really have heard so many things from so many places, and they just are overwhelmed.
So true. And, so we literally go through a person's day. And so how are you spending your time right now? I also have an assessment tool that I can use that for goal setting. So again, like I said earlier, we only really focus on, of course, what the woman wants to work on. And so if exercise is a goal of hers, I have gone to the gym with my clients and I'm like, here's how we start. And we might start with doing something really simple for 10, 15 minutes, and we work up from there. It's all about, again, adapting the activity to meet the person where they're at, and breaking it down into small, achievable steps, right? It's like the show on Menopause, Small Achievable Goals. I don't know if you've watched it, but yeah.
Well, I think a time audit is a really valuable tool, because women may not think they have any time, but they may be surprised to realize that the amount of time they have is enough to get started. And then that time can grow when there's a bit of focus and strategy applied to it.
And as we know with habits, as we continue with them, we build our capacity to put them into our day, right? Because we start to see the benefits. And it might be as something simple as, like we said, going for a 10-minute walk with your dog around the block. If that's all you can manage, fantastic. Let's try doing that a couple of times a week. And then where can we go? Like, what would the next step be? We don't have to start. We start where they're at, really.
And us gals, I think with gals, we just try to fit so many things into our days. And so our days are oftentimes so full. And then then we have to be the best at everything, So then throwing exercise into the mix, it's like, well, now I've got to be the best exercise. I've got to know how to do all the things. And, taking those baby steps is one of the things Shawna and I are always reminding our listeners is so crucial, and figuring out where can you carve out. Maybe you only have like a tiny little sliver of your day right now that you can and maybe it's only once a week, and that you can even carve out the time, and then you build from there.
It's so true. And I think again, if you're a really visual person, to see it on like actually laid out that can be really powerful. People haven't necessarily even had time, like you say, in their overwhelming life to sit down and really do that. And it sounds really simple, but it is a really powerful way to be. Like, most women leave the appointment and go, wow, I didn't realize that I could chunk, 15 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and practice something that I really want to do. So it's exciting.
I wanted to dive into the idea of work and the menopausal woman, because there's an alarming amount of women that leave the workforce during that transition, the struggles of it. And I know you're an advocate for sticking with it. So tell us a little bit about how you feel about that, how you work with women during that difficult time. Any advice there?
Yeah, I'm so happy about the work that the the Menopause Foundation of Canada is doing, and they have so many great resources about menopause inclusive workplaces. And I think their campaign is called Menopause Works Here. So check that out if you haven't. But yes, like as an OT, some of us do work in vocational rehab. We actually, a lot of people make a joke about OT. Oh, well, are you going to get me a job as an occupational therapist? But of course, a lot of us are really skilled at looking at your environment, whether that be your home environment or your work environment, and helping you adapt it to meet your needs. You know, a lot of women during menopause, they're exhausted. They have to sit at their desk all day. They have some new sensory sensitivities, like the lighting and the noise and the the brain fog that they're experiencing because it's so noisy. Like how maybe the scents in their office, like how can they adapt? Also, if you have pain all of a sudden that you've never had before, you have back pain or hip pain, maybe something like a sit to stand desk, or like really doing a deep dive into the workplace environment is something that I can offer. Because I really feel like I think on the menopause on that website they talk about $3.5 billion lost from women in the workplace, which is just astounding. And I think more and more there is more support with awareness about menopause, maybe adjusting women's schedules. But honestly, I really feel strongly about if that is something like an occupation of your work life that is very meaningful to you, I want to help you stay there and keep it going.
Yeah.
What are the big things that you see that are taking women out in particular? Or are they like just leaving completely? And are they changing? What are you seeing?
Well, I think there in a lot of environments there is more and more flexibility, but there are some that are just not. And it's like you work full time on this schedule or you don't. You know, that's up to you. Whereas I feel like things are shifting now, and I think the more that women themselves can advocate, like when you think about the wisdom and the knowledge that women at this age have to offer, I think it's a lot of we really should be accommodating more. So sometimes that could mean taking a couple of breaks in the day that we know how productive we are, like taking a break, getting outside for 10 minutes can make such a difference. Really advocating for yourself is important.
And as much as it is the Wild West for menopause, where there are some downsides to the monetization of menopause in the media right now, the awareness of it is really fantastic because our mothers didn't have this opportunity to talk about it. It just was Voldemort. It just was not a word to be spoken of. And because we're talking about it now, our daughters and nieces and the young women coming up maybe will have a better time and a better work environment and things set up for them a little more positively going forward.
Absolutely. I mean, that's our goal, isn't it? That for the next generation, I hope like my two daughters know more about menopause than they're probably needing to know right now. But I love it, and they're so happy to have awareness, right? And I mean, I so agree with you. My mom is in her 80s, and she was shocked when I first told her I wanted to start talking to women about menopause. Like it just wasn't something that was done. And
Yes.
it's like,
Yes.
and now it is fantastic, and there's so many resources out there to support women to stay in the workplace, and it helps everybody. It helps them. It helps the past generations to know that this is actually changing and the future, like you said. So it benefits.
If you had a wish for our listeners today, what would it be?
Really for that reframe of menopause that we've been talking about a little bit already, it's that the way we think about it. Because I've always learned through my work that when you have a positive outlook towards any sort of change in your health, you have much better health outcomes. And I've seen that over and over again. And, in Japan, I think they call menopause Kaminski, which means renewal years. And I really see menopause that way. And I wish that more women would, and more health practitioners would, that it's really a time for renewal and, taking that wisdom and resilience that we have built, and not something to be feared or dreaded. It can be a bumpy time. It can be really challenging and overwhelming, but there's some real positives to it too. I think it's a time when we really can come into our own and get back to some things that we maybe haven't been doing for ourselves in the last few years, but want to get back to. So, Catherine O'Hara, who I adore, I wasn't surprised to see a quote from her this week that she had read somewhere, that when you approach your 70s, that you could either look at it like, oh, well, I should downsize and I should start slowing down, or I could look at, okay, how many more years, if I live to 90, what do I want to spend? Like, what's the quality of my life in those years going to look like? Which I want to look forward, which I think is so powerful. So,
my wish would be lots of sleep for all of our listeners.
Yeah, we can all use a lot more sleep, I think. But I couldn't agree with you more, Susanne, regarding the attitude that we look at whether it's menopause or whether we're through menopause, our aging years, because the attitude really can make the difference. And maybe if someone is listening and doesn't have that positive attitude, maybe that person needs support, something that you could offer. Like, you're not glossing over it that, hey, it's all sunshine and rainbows. It's not. There are challenging times, but there are some benefits. There are some good things to look forward to. And we just have to keep, be patient with ourselves in taking care of ourselves to find those things.
It's really all about self-compassion. You hit it on the head, like being kind to ourselves during these years, and accessing supports, talking to a friend, asking for help. It's everything, right? The more we talk about any kind of topic, the better it's going to be.
Thanks for listening. You'll find me, Alli, on Instagram at Alli Kerr Fitness.
And you'll find me, Shawna, on Instagram at Shawna Kaminski. Feel free to pop us a DM with questions and or feedback. If you're enjoying the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast, please subscribe and share it with other health-minded women. Ratings and reviews are also much appreciated and help us get our message out to a larger audience.
Until next time, be healthy and be happy.